So I hear that the Russians are sending assault helicopters to Syria to help Assad use his own people for target practice.
Yes. Apparently it's all part of that reset thing.
Well, it has been over 3 years. Perhaps it needs another reset. Windows doesn't go that long without one.
Actually, it wasn't a reset button. It was an overcharge button, because no one at the State Department knows Russian. That's probably why the Russians are now charging us over $60 million a seat for astronaut rides to the ISS.
So with a new Cold War heating up with the Russians, wouldn't Hillary like to have some kind of leverage over them?
One would think.
Well, isn't there a law that we won't trade with countries that help Iran, North Korea, or Syria in advanced weapons development?
Yes.
And hasn't Russia been helping Iran develop nuclear weapons and missiles for years?
Yes.
So Russia is in continual violation of that law.
Yes.
Wouldn't it help with the Syria problem if Hillary told Vlad, no more trade, because you are in violation of the law?
Yes, it would.
So why doesn't she tell him that?
Because they have the only vehicle capable of getting our astronauts to and from the ISS since the shuttle retired, and even before the shuttle retired, they had the only vehicle capable of acting as a lifeboat. If Hillary enforced the law, it would mean that American astronauts would have no access to the ISS, in which we have invested $100 billion over almost the past 3 decades.
You would think it would be in the national security interest to develop our own capability to get to the ISS as soon as possible.
I would indeed think that. In fact, I do think that. But Congress doesn't seem to think so.
What do you mean?
The fastest, and perhaps only way to get our own capability is to fully fund the Commercial Crew Program, but Congress continually underfunds it, while demanding that NASA spend billions on the Senate launch system, which will do nothing in terms of giving us access to the ISS, and which NASA's own internal studies say is unnecessary for deep space exploration.
Why are they doing that?
Haven't we been over this before? Congress isn't concerned about access to the ISS, or space exploration, or apparently even whether or not the Russians are helping Assad slaughter children with helicopters. All they seem to care about is the jobs that are created by keeping the Senate launch system program going, even though it will almost certainly be cancelled when it starts to run over its budget and schedule, which has already started to happen, or so rumor has it.
Has not SpaceX had 3 successful Falcon 9 flights with no failures?
Yes.
Have they not had 2 successful pressurized Dragon capsule flights with no failures?
Yes.
Could not an astronaut have flown on both of those flights safely, with an adequate life support system?
Yes. On the first one, Elon Musk said that a passenger would, quote, have had a very nice ride, unquote. A SpaceX astronaut said that he could have ridden it with a scuba tank and a beanbag chair.
And does not Boeing have a capsule that they could maybe fly people within a year or 2, if they skipped the flight tests, and didn't wait for completion of their abort system?
Possibly. Someone should ask them.
And didn't NASA propose to put crew on the Ares 1 and Orion after a single flight test? And didn't they fly the very first shuttle flight with astronauts?
Yes.
So why is that NASA, who has killed 17 astronauts, most of them in flight, doesn't need flight tests, but the commercial providers do?
They don't say.
What vehicle would Boeing's capsule go up on?
The Atlas V.
How many failures has it had that would require the use of an abort system?
None, in more than 24 launches. The only failure it has ever had was an upper stage issue that put a satellite in a lower orbit, a problem that would have showed up after the abort system was no longer needed.
What is the probability of loss of crew on a Dragon flight right now?
No one knows for sure, though SpaceX has probably done some sort of probabilistic risk assessment. Based on its 3-flight history, with no failures, the current Bayesian probability of a successful flight is 75%, but the probability of a failure requiring an abort system is certainly much less than 10% at this point.
So how much safety does an abort system add?
Again, no one knows for sure in either case, but the most precise guess would be not much. After all, SpaceX demonstrated their pad safety with the launch abort before the last flight. The likelihood of an event that requires it is probably pretty low. But at least with the pusher systems that SpaceX and Boeing are developing, it won't add more hazards than it removes, as the one that NASA developed for Orion may. And of course, even without an abort system, Dragon could be used as a lifeboat as soon as they put in some kind of life support system, allowing the crew capacity of the ISS to increase, providing a huge increase in actual research time.
How many astronauts in the astronaut office would say that they would be afraid to fly in either vehicle at this point?
Are you kidding me? They are astronauts.
So we could have vehicles capable of getting to ISS in the next year or two that the astronauts would probably be willing to fly, for much less money than we are spending on Russian rides and lifeboats. But Congress insists that astronaut safety is a higher priority than having leverage over the Russians or having our own access to the ISS before 2017?
Yes.
It's almost as though none of this is important.
Of course it is not important. If it were important, Congress would ask NASA how much money it would take to get astronauts to the ISS as soon as possible, and then provide them with that much money. In fact, if it were really important, they would tell NASA that safety is not the highest priority, but that eliminating our need for the Russians is, and we'll develop things like abort systems later, but start flying crews now, or as soon as possible. They would say that things like launch abort systems are nice, and will improve things later, but we need access now, and it is safe enough without them. But it is not important. Space hasn't been important for over 40 years.